Big company, small company, startup, large company, everyone feels exactly the same way. And so timing trumps market, market trumps team trumps product, product trumps brand trumps distribution. You don't have all six, you don't win. In the short term, most companies and most people will overestimate the impact that a technology can have.
Welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest from the Silicon Valley, where unicorns roam and innovation never sleeps. We've got top investors, superstar founders, and well-known tech executives lined up to share their secrets on building and investing in successful companies. Just a quick disclaimer, while we may sound like financial geniuses, but please don't mistake us for your friendly neighborhood financial advisors. So let's get started and dive into the wild world of tech entrepreneurship. Great news for all our Smart Venture Podcast listeners. Since January 8th, I've been hosting a new daily live show, Venture with Grace, on LinkedIn Live at 9 a.m. PT every weekday. Follow me, Grace Gone, on LinkedIn to catch up on past episodes and stay updated with future ones. You will get insights from key industry players and have the chance to ask questions live. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our YouTube channel under the Live button. Join me on this journey and let's explore the world of innovation and investment together. This episode is brought to you by LG Nova. Get ready to ignite your passion for innovation at the 4th Annual InnoFest, happening at the iconic Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco on September 25th and 26th. This two-day event, brought to you by LG Nova, is your chance to dive into the future with industry leaders and cutting-edge startups shaping HealthTech, AI, CleanTech, life science, smart life, mobility, and more. And here's something extra special. I'll be hosting a panel at InnoFest, guiding a dynamic discussion on the future of AI and the workforce. Join me along with other thought leaders as we explore the trends and technology driving innovation and positive change. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity to be part of the conversation and help create a brighter, more innovative tomorrow. Register today and be part of the movement at InnoFest 2024. Hi, Jeetu. Welcome to Venture with Grace today.
How are you, Grace? Thank you for having me.
I want to start with your background. I feel like you have such an interesting story that your father used to work at Bernie Madoff. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then there was some crazy story, and then you had to escape that to come to America. You also talk about having a platform is very impactful. You were talking about this person who's selling things in India. They learned 9 different language. He learned like a different language each year. You feel like compared to him versus like people who are doing sales in Silicon Valley, it's like the only difference is people here is with a platform. There was a lot of compact lessons there. I want you to start with your story.
Oh, you're so sweet, and that's a lot of research. So let's see. I grew up in India, and I moved here in '91. My dad, like you mentioned, was kind of like a high stakes con man, like Bernie Madoff. It was kind of an unfortunate thing to grow up with and witness. But I at some point in time, my mother and I decided that this was just it was too traumatic for both of us to stay within that kind of environment. So my mom was a complete angel. So we actually put her up in an undisclosed location because my dad was pretty abusive to her. And then I left and moved to the US. And, I came over to my mother's brother lived here. So he was kind enough to put me up for a while. And then from there, one thing led to the other. And, in life, usually like a lot of life has a lot to do with luck. And we keep crediting ourselves with all the ability we have, but it's actually largely right time at the right place. And then if you're blessed enough to have the right attitude to be humble about it and take advantage of the opportunity, then you tend to do relatively okay in life. And so I was lucky enough when I came here to meet some amazing people who gave me a helping hand. And one thing led to the other. I got into a good school. I actually started my own business while I was in school. I actually joined a company as an intern. Then a few of us did a leverage buyout of the original investor and then bought the company out. I ran that business for about 17 years. And then I was really getting this itch for like, I want to learn scale because like it was a small company and I'm like, this isn't satisfying enough. So I want to understand scale, because one thing that fascinated me about America is the just sheer scale proportion of everything. Like, the thing that was really mind blowing to me when I first came here was the consistency across the entirety of the country.
Mhm,
There's when you go on an expressway, the signs are all the same. It's
mhm,
the same sign, kind of signage. When you go into a strip mall, it has kind of similar stores anywhere. And so there was this level of consistency that just fascinated me. And it said, wow, these businesses had to think so large to be able to go into every single place.
mhm.
So I wanted to learn scale. And the best place to learn scale is software, because you make something once and you sell it billions of times. And so I moved to Silicon Valley, joined a company called EMC, which is now owned by Dell. I
Mhm.
was in the software group and the CTO there. Did a bunch of roles, so CTO for a while, then CMO. Then I ran a business for them that we had acquired as CEO and GM. And then when Dell was acquiring EMC, we carved out that business and sold it to private equity. And then I joined Box, which was a competitor, but I knew Aaron Levy for a while, and he's still one of my best friends, and did that, stayed there for 5 years, and then I was actually going to take a job at another company, and then Chuck called me like 9 days before I was going to take a job, and just gave me this opportunity that was hard to refuse. And it's been a great ride at Cisco. Been very, very fortunate to be here, and before you know it, it's like everything works out. I have a wonderful 13-year-old daughter, great family. So it's hard to look back and kind of feel bad about anything that happened, because all of those things kind of were building blocks towards where we actually end up being at the end of it.
I feel like your story is super fascinating, and I wonder how did you plan out your career early on? Overall, I feel like you're very badass in terms of how you built your own company as well as like you're building your own career. Like, you're very successful. You're on the board of JLL as like a person who used to work in real estate. I feel like it's a pretty big deal. I wonder when you were planning out your career, who is on your personal board of advisors? Did you ever envision yourself being the C level of big companies, or how are you figuring this out throughout the journey when you moved to the US?
I don't think like these things, we plan all these things out in a perfect plan, and then it almost never works out quite according to plan. So you have to kind of be a little bit more fluid and just seek learning opportunities in different places. And so I can't say that the path that I took was either the conventional path or one that I would have planned out. And but it was one of those things where you keep your head down, you work hard, you try to add value in what you're doing, make sure that you've got a strong moral compass and work ethic, and usually things tend to work out. My personal board of directors, that's a very interesting question. In fact, there was an article that was written in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago where I talked about this very specific topic. And I think that group keeps expanding over time, but there's a fantastic group of people that I tend to tap into from time to time. And it's probably like about a couple dozen people, but the few that if you were to say pick a few right away and tell me who those are, outside of the people that I work with, who I seek counsel from all the time, Chuck and Fran, who's a good friend of mine, and there's a guy named Jonathan and Mark Patterson, and these are all there's all the ELT members, that the executive team leaders at Cisco tend to be great sounding boards. But the one person that's been my kind of, so let me give you like 5 or 6 people on the personal board. So one of them is, of course, my better half. She's usually a very good, kind of counsel for me on things that I'm doing. And over the years, she's actually gotten to know me better, and it's been great. And then I have this head of operations, and I never take a job without her wherever I go. She's absolutely amazing. So she tends to be a person that I look up to quite a bit. And, she knows me well enough and she doesn't suffer fools. So like she'll tell me exactly what I'm not doing right at times. And then sometimes it doesn't even feel good, but like you know that it's going to be 100% the truth. And she's got the perfect balance of boosting me up when I need it and bringing me back to earth if I start flying too high. So Jesse is one. I think Aaron Levy is a great one that I actually look to quite a bit. We have dinner almost every month. In fact, I'm having dinner with him tomorrow night, and what he brings to my life more than anything else, besides perspective, is laughter. Like, I probably laugh the most with anyone that laugh with him. He just makes things lighthearted. So that he's a great guy. There's a guy named Tor Mirren, who was the head of marketing at Apple. There's Jeremy Burton, who was one of my bosses. There's Rick Devenuti, who's my coach, who used to be my boss. And then, there's a bunch of other folks that I would look to. And I think Chuck over the years has gotten to be a great person that I will ask personal advice from as well from time to time. And he's been a fantastic kind of, personal board of director for me. So I think, look, we all kind of stand on top of other people, giant shoulders and kind of get ahead. And I think these are all, I'm very fortunate to have. Oh, there's one other person, which is my chief of staff, Sheer. She used to be my assistant and has now gotten to know me so well. And she travels with me quite a bit. And so, I tend to look to her for a lot of things, especially if I start neglecting myself and if I'm not working out, if I'm not being healthy, like she's going to be the one that'll actually get me straight in no time. So, very lucky to have a lot of people around me. One of my very good friends, Natasha, is a great person to that I seek advice from. One of my nieces, Ami, is fantastic. One of my other friends, Ami, is great. So there's so many people that you can I have a lot of coaches. That's the way I put it.
Let's talk about the skills. If someone wants to be the EVP of Cisco one day, what kind of skill they need to acquire early on in their career? And you had the entrepreneurial journey. You joined a startup that's fast growing. Eventually, you went back to a big company. How do you pick the right startup to join? When you join Cisco, how do you kind of quickly leverage what you have learned at the smaller company to run your current division?
I would say that don't aspire to be a title, but try to make sure that you get a certain set of skills that can be portable to any title. Because the reality is at some point in time, getting too fixated on a title, you might or might not get it. But, it's important to learn what are good leadership traits to have in complex jobs. And if that gets you going, then it's kind of worth kind of exploring that side of it. In my mind, the things that I tend to gravitate to most are impact and learning. So if you can have an outsized impact with the body of work, with the time that you can put into this. Look, job is a pretty uneven trade between an employer and an employee. The employer gives you money, you give them your time. Money is replenishable, time is not, right? And so when you think about it, that trade is pretty uneven. The employee is giving more than the employer. And when you decide that you're going to give more into the job than what you're going to get, what you have to be very careful about is, am I going to get enough out of it fulfillment wise? And so you have to make sure that you've picked a job where you think you can have an impact, where you have instinct about the problem space that you're trying to solve something in, where you actually get energized about it, because there'll be days when you're going to hate your job and you're going to need to get in. And the only thing that'll get you in is the ability of enthusiasm you have for the mission that you've actually got, that you've signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
And the team of people that you work with, I think all of those things tend to be more important. And I'd say that in my mind, if you were to say your question of what kind of startup would I pick? I typically have, whether it's a startup or a big company, I tend to have rubric of 6 things that I look at.
Mm-hmm.
And they all have to be there for a company to get to be great, right? And if it's a startup where it's prior to these 6 things happening, you have to make sure that you can at least see a pathway to these 6 things coming true.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in descending order of importance, but you need all 6. So number 1 is timing. You have to have the right timing. The great products have been built at exactly the wrong time and not seen light of day.
Mm-hmm.
So timing's most important. Number 2 is a market. You have to be able to go attack a large market a chunk at a time. And so market's really important. The third is team. And a lot of times people debate out, is team more important than market, or is market more important than team? This being in venture, a great market with a mediocre team will pull you up, and a crappy market with a great team will bring you down. Market always wins. So I actually feel like it's timing, market, team. Team is number 3. And when I say team, I mean, you have to have a group of people that you're working with that round you out. That, not everyone is a Michael Jordan in a basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make sure that you get rounded out. 3 is team. Number 4 is product, which I think is the heart and soul of a company. You have to make sure that you're proud of the product that you're building, and that you actually are able to get to a point where you're going to be able to take products that you're proud of in the market. I actually think it's fundamentally unethical to take mediocre products to the market and peddle them out. There's way too many bad products already. Number 5 is brand. One of my mentors had once told me, Jeetu, don't ever go to a company who's lost their core brand essence, because it's very hard to resurrect back. It's okay if you don't have the product right, because you can go fix that. you cannot fix a damaged brand. You have to make sure that you have trust of the customers. And then number 6 is distribution. If you don't have distribution, you can't get your product or service to the hands of millions of people. And so timing trumps market, market trumps team, team trumps product, product trumps brand, brand trumps distribution. You don't have all 6, you don't win. And so look at those things when you're going into it. And if you're in your early career, make sure you work for someone that actually is willing to bet on you. Because I'll tell you this, the most important thing that I did in my life, and I don't even think I did it, I was dumb lucky to get there. I had some of the best bosses, and they bet on me in ways that I would have never been able to imagine. And Aaron was an amazing guy to work with and for. Chuck is an amazing guy to work with and for. I just think that I've had Rick Devenuti was a great guy to work with and for. And so these are all people that bet on me. And so make sure that you look for that in people. Is like, are there people who are selflessly going to bet on you and don't see you as competition and are looking to kind of propel you forward? That would be my advice.
I wonder, when you're thinking about finding people that will bet on you, how do you expose yourself in front of the quote unquote right people? How do you get on their
I
radar?
actually don't know I think you listen very closely to what they're talking about. If they talk a lot about what they have done versus they talk a lot about what their job is to help the team do, you will be able to tell the difference. People who are overly focused on themselves are good in the initial part of the career, but not that great when you have to lead teams. And so that might be a thing to keep in mind. And you also need someone who actually pushes you to a point of discomfort. Like, you don't want to have someone who's always nice to you. Like, there are some people like Rick Devenuti was a guy that I worked for. I hated working for him when I worked for him. He was tough, and there were times when I would just get really frustrated. But now when I look, and the moment Jesse and I left Cisco and we went to Box, we'd keep looking at each other going, what would Rick have done at this point? And then after we did that enough number of times, and I came to Cisco, I'm like, I'm hiring him as my coach. And so he's my coach, and it's actually fantastic to have people like that, but they're not always going to be kind to you. They're going to be tough on you. They're going to put you in a position of discomfort. But what that'll do is it'll actually push you to be your best, and you will learn to grow and blossom underneath them. And so I think that's a pretty important trait is, just find people who are willing to push you in the uncomfortable zone, but not kill your confidence. Like they will make you uncomfortable. You might sweat it a little bit, but they're not going to kill your confidence. They'll boost you up, but bring you down. Bring you down to earth, I mean. They'll boost you up, but bring you down to earth.
Totally. What do you identify as your unfair advantage, and how do you leverage it to grow your career?
I think my unfair advantage is I'm really hungry and I'm really curious. And I've always found that it's hard to teach hunger. You either have it or you don't. And I tend to look at people, and I think it's probably a more important trait than intellect. And if I look at myself, I'm probably not the smartest guy in the room, but I'll definitely tell you that I'll outwork anyone, and I will learn the things that I need to learn so that I can actually get to be smart enough about a topic area. And I will know what my limitations are and bring people around me who can actually complement me and not try to do everything, because I'm not good at everything. In fact, I'm good at very few things. Most of the other things, I think the team around me is what actually makes the engine hum. And so I would say hunger and curiosity. And the third one I'd say is probably just the, slight gift of communication, I think helps, because if you're a strong communicator, you can actually bring people along. And so that was one that I think over time I've gotten better. I wasn't necessarily as good in my earlier career, but I had a lot of people around me that were good, that actually they pushed me to get better. And so I think, but having strong communication skills is almost kind of a prerequisite these days, in all forms, right? Whether it be social media, whether it be one-on-one, whether it be in a group setting, public speaking, whatever it might be, you have to be able to communicate with people with a level of authenticity. And if you can do that right, I think you'll get the benefit of support from people that will actually, kind of join the race with you. So hunger, curiosity, communication, I would say.
What is your day-to-day like working as a big executive at a big tech company?
I don't, a lot of people ask me this question very often, and I don't think there's a common day, because There are days I'm traveling a lot, and there are days I'm working from home, and there are days I'm in the office. But what I do know is, it's largely around working with people, pressure testing the work that they're doing, and making sure that we can debate out ideas so that we can, whether it be building a product, whether it be coming up with a go-to-market strategy, whether it be looking at an execution plan, whether it be inspecting the performance that we've had. I think it's important to create a space of intensity
Mhm.
um, and truth. One of the things that I think what ends up happening a lot of times in companies is people create their own version of the truth, and then they start to point to that, saying, "Okay, look, this is the truth." And it's like you have to seek the truth. You can't go out and have data. Like a lot of times people say, "Well, the data doesn't lie." Actually, data lies all the time. You can take any piece of data and spin it into whatever story you want to spin it into. So it's extremely important to understand, without the spin, what the truth is and whether or not you're actually succeeding or you're failing. I think most people in most teams aren't intellectually honest about that at all times. And I think the moment you stop being intellectually honest about that, that's when things start going sideways, because you have to know what's not working and what you want to fix. And that's not a failure on someone's part. It's just a matter of, these things are not working and these things are working. It's just fact, right? And the moment you start to evade facts, it gets to be very hard to go out and run a business. And so that would be what I would say is super important, is, just, it's not what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's about the mindset that you have coming in every single day, which is seek the truth. And that's the one thing that's consistent in any day that I wake up. I'm just seeking the truth. What's working, what's not working? Why is it not working? Am I being too generous with myself about the reason why it's not working? Am I blaming it on someone else when in fact the problem's on my end? Those are things that you have to keep seeking and keep unraveling as you go forward. Like, keep peeling the onion.
I wonder, how do you set up a KPI for yourself when you first join a company like Cisco or back in time Box?
So I think this is a very good question. On anytime I've joined a company, the first 100 days are very consequential. And like, a lot of times people, when you ask them, what are you going to do when you first come in for the first 3 months? Like, I'm just going to listen for the first 3 months. I think that's a really bad idea. I think you can listen for the first 30 days. You have to form an opinion and a strategy in the next 30, and you have to make sure that that gets syndicated out to people in the following 30. But what has to happen is there has to be something that is unmistakably you, that created positive change, that people have to see in the first 30 days, for first 90 days. And why is that so important? Because the moment you wait too long without having any change, people start questioning, saying, what did this person do really? And by the way, I tell this to every new employee that comes into Cisco. Your first 90 days to 100 days, be extremely impatient about starting to figure out a way to demonstrate value that you added because of your unique perspective that you brought to the table. In the absence of that, you will start losing momentum from your peer set. You want to make sure that you let your peers know that you're raising the game for everyone and they are succeeding as a function of you. And that, I think, is a pretty important dimension to, which means when you start thinking that way, you have to say, okay, so what can I do to make their lives better? What can I do to make sure that they achieve their objectives? What am I going to do to make the company better? And those things fundamentally change the momentum that you create around you and the tempo you create around you for then moving forward for the next few years. So I think the first 90 to 100 days, super critical. Don't squander those.
I guess, how do you find out what part you can contribute and add value? And then how do you quantify it so people can no, it's you?
I actually think it's just a matter of, like, what problems, you have to pick one or two problems and then go deep into those problems and work with a team of people and just drive it. And I think you have to be a driver on something that comes out that's a positive outcome in the first 90 to 100 days. And I think the 90 to 100, the reason for the significance of that is, it's a short enough amount of time that when you do something meaningful, it's going to get noticed. It's like, oh, wow, that was actually pretty cool. And didn't he just join? That's a very cool thing.
What is it like working as a board member of JLL?
JLL is a great board. That was my first public board that I joined. I was just at one of their board meetings. It's a fantastic board. They are, it's such an interesting business, and such a kind of, how we have our facilities set up and work and commercial real estate is such an important part of how people spend majority of their day. They spend majority of the day in the office, right? Or at least they used to before COVID. And so I think it's a pretty phenomenal business, and highly kind of thoughtful, measured, ethical company. I love their CEO, Christian. He's a fantastic leader. The management team is amazing. Their chairman, Bobby, is a very, very thoughtful leader as well. We've got a great board, so I'm very fortunate to be a small part of it for the past 5 years or so.
How do you become a board member of a public company?
Like in most things in life, you have to understand why you want to do it. The reason I wanted to get on a board is because I needed to better understand how my board was thinking, and I wanted to be in their shoes, so that when I went and presented to my board, I understood the board's perspective rather than just trying to sell them my perspective. And I will say this, I sit on 2 public boards right now, and it is probably one of the most instructive things I've had as a lesson to understand how to deal with my board.
Mm.
It also gave me some perspective on like how do different businesses in different industries run. And it also told me like what are things that are kind of common problems across every industry. There's some problems that are kind of common problems across every industry. Like we all think they're unique, but they're not really that unique. How many people think that they're scarce on resource? Every single company that's out there on the planet thinks that they've got scarcity of resource. They don't have enough funding. They don't have enough resource. Big company, small company, startup, large company, everyone feels exactly the same way. And at that point in time, you realize constraint is actually your friend.
Mm.
Constraint is not your enemy. It's the abundance that can be given to you that is in fact what your enemy is. And I think most people get into this failure state saying, well, I can't do this because I don't have enough resource. Most great things that got invented in the world happened as a direct consequence of constraint, not as a consequence of abundance. And so we have to make sure that, and that's a common trait across all sectors, all businesses, all geographies. And it's a very interesting kind of dynamic to look at as you go into business. And what getting into a board does is it gives you a perspective on how a business runs, and it also gives you an appreciation for the fact that in businesses there is no single person that decides everything. It's always a group of people. And so whenever we feel like, oh, if I had that job, I'd be able to make every decision. That's a very naive way to think, because the reality is there's always another thing. We have this guy, Jeff Schultz, who's my strategy guy, amazing guy, worked with him for like 12, 15 years. And he has this great saying that he says, which is, Jeetu, people used to always tell me like, I want a seat at the table. And the reality is there's always another table. You think that you got the seat at the table, but there's always some of the table that's actually, you feel like if you're in the leadership team, you're like, oh, the table is the board. If you're in the board, the table is a management team. And so at some point in time, you realize that people are just working together, and there's an inherent check and balance that needs to be there in business for the business to be a productive business.
What is the board's KPI? How does that work? And how does that working with so many different people coming from diverse kind of things to be on a board?
A board has very few jobs. I'd say 3 jobs, right? Job number 1, you have to make sure that you've hired the right leader and don't tolerate the wrong leader, the CEO. That's the first job of the board. Second job, keep the company from doing anything that's shady or illegal. There has to be a governance aspect to it. Like you need to make sure that there's responsibility and ethics and integrity that's followed in the governance and the managing risk for the business. And then the third aspect is from time to time, broaden the aperture of the management team and ask them questions that they might have not thought about because they're too close to the problem. And your inexperience in understanding that business really well is actually the asset that you have. So don't try to get to be the operator in the business as a board member. Your job is not to go operate it. Your job is to go out and provide high level, broad aperture and guidance. And one of the things that I'm very careful about in these boards is you can't ask too many questions. Like in management, you can ask as many questions as you want. In the board, you can't ask too many questions because every question you ask has the potential of creating a work stream for the management team. And you don't want to create too many work streams for the management team, by asking too many questions. So what you have to do is be very measured, ask the right number of questions. And those questions that you ask should either be broadening their aperture, should be assessing risk, should be evaluating the strategy, and should be making sure that there's effective planning from a talent and culture perspective within the board, for an encouragement for that towards the company. But don't ask too many questions. There's one thing that's worse than a completely disengaged board member is an over-engaged board member. You don't want to have a board member that's become management. Like, that's the worst thing you can do. So, like, I always tell the board members, if you need anything, I'm here for you. But I'm not going to initiate any meetings with you. You have to come to me if you want something, and I'm happy to help if you need my help.
You mentioned ask right questions. What are right questions to ask?
I think, like, the big questions that I find add value is when someone's thinking about a problem in a very focused way, you can miss the big picture. So as a board member, you can just make them kind of zoom out a little bit and say, have you considered, like, I'll give you an example. If at JLL, someone is thinking about a service around how can you go out and make your tenant's life really, really enjoyable as they're thinking about a commercial piece of real estate, the question to ask is, what is happening to the role of the office post-COVID? And that's actually a good question to reset and rethink about. Are your assumptions that you've made about the business still the right assumptions? There's no judgment in that question. It is just a question out of curiosity. What is the right, is the role of the office going to fundamentally change? And is that going to change your business and the assumptions that you're running your business with? And the answer might be no. The answer might be yes, but, or the answer might be it's completely going to change. But I think it's important to have those discussions in spirit, kind of encourage those discussions from happening. Like, does that give you a little bit of a flavor?
Yeah, I feel like I'm so fascinated about it. By it. What is a board made of? Do you get invited to be a board member, or do you apply? How does this conversation happen? Is this like a job that you can just apply, or well, how does it work?
Yeah, I think the question you have to ask, so yes, you apply, there's recruiting firms that actually go seek board members, and typically they'll look for independent board members that are outside of investors on a board. And typically they will look for those board members with certain set of skills. So you might have someone with finance skills, you might have someone with tech skills, you might have someone who's a CEO, you might have someone, so those are all the different kind of skills that you would need. Sometimes you hire a board member because you want to make sure that that board member could be a potential successor for the CEO. Those are all kind of things that, tend to work out on a board. And you do connect with some of the, recruiting firms, especially the public boards. And it's also, it's very healthy to change out board members from time to time. So I think, like, 7 to 10 years is probably about the stay that you want to have in a board. You don't want to be in a board for 2 years. That's actually a very bad thing to do. And you don't want to be in a board for 20 years. I think it's being in a board for a certain amount of time and then getting fresh thinking to come in, because you might actually get too close to management. And you want to have some level of impartiality between yourself and the management as you go through it.
I wonder, what are some key learnings that you took away from being a board member? You mentioned you wanted to join a board because of you wanted to learn about how a board thinking about your company. I wonder, what were the lessons there?
I think how governance happens in large companies is a very important lesson to learn. How you manage succession of CEOs, very important. It takes years to build out a succession plan if you do it right. You groom the successors that are there, and you make sure that they can be the next batch of people from which you can pick a CEO. I think succession planning is one of the most important things that a board does as well, because you want to make sure that there's continuity when you go from one CEO to the other in a company. And so one of the big jobs that a board has is pick the right leader for the company. And there's always more risk when you pick someone external. There's always less risk when you pick someone who's internal. So grooming from within is always a good thing. Now, that doesn't mean that you always pick someone internal, but it's always a nice thing to have some options to choose from internally. How committees work, how compensation is assigned for employees, how cybersecurity, risk is assessed within a company was a super valuable thing. I sit on an audit committee, and, sitting down and looking at how cyber risk is evaluated, very, very instructive. So I think those are all the things that and then strategy, how should the capital allocation strategy work in a board? What do you do from how do you make sure that you assign how do you construct the right plan? How do you make sure that there's the right level of ethics in the way that the company operates? All of those things are kind of good aspects to inspect in a company.
When you were, I guess, like,
you really like the board thing, huh? You should
no, like,
you should get yourself to sit on a board. You seem like you're very
I know,
fascinated
right?
with board
Yeah.
seats.
Oh God. Please tell
It's
me.
actually not as glorious as you think. It's not like a super high glory job. It's one of those jobs where it's just hard work, but not that much glory, because the CEO is the one that actually gets most of the credit when something goes right, and all that the board is doing is making sure that they're constructing the right governance model in place.
What makes a good public CEO? How do people successfully become a public CEO?
In my mind, it is someone who can instill confidence in the employee base, in the customers, and the investor base. It is someone who has a vision. It's someone who has care for culture, someone who knows how to hire the best people, and someone who actually fundamentally understands the value of creating something that's asymmetric and differentiated in the market, for the company. And eventually, a CEO should be measured based on what they have done for the stock of the company. Have they created economic opportunity for the employees, for the shareholders, and for the customers? Those are the three stakeholders in my mind that you have to really care for, and you have to make sure that you do them in a very thoughtful way.
Coming from being a close student of the emerging tech sector, back in time it was crypto, now it's AI. I feel like it's a lot of hype making for the startup industry. I wonder, how does it look like to increase the stock when you are in this category? We've seen Microsoft have a really good play in OpenAI and all that kind of things. I wonder if that's could be recreated over every company or every public company. How do you see like people leveraging a particular sector that's in the hype cycle to
I actually don't think you can actually take, yeah, I don't think you can actually take a playbook of one company and apply it to another. It just doesn't work. Every company has their own playbook. And in fact, the biggest mistakes that get made is when you take a playbook from one company and jam it into another company. Because it's kind of like, that just is not what the culture of the company is, and not what the business is. And so one of the biggest failure states that leaders get into is they say, I did this before in this other company, so I'm going to do it over here. It's like, no, it's not going to work here.
Mhm.
What I did at Box would not work at Cisco. What I do at Cisco would not work at Box, right? And so I think that's pretty important to keep in mind, that there is no repeatable playbook in business. But what is extremely important is that you catch the mega trends that are happening and use them as tailwinds, and the difference between a mega trend and a hype cycle. And I think most people don't understand the difference. In my mind, for example, AI is a megatrend. It is fundamentally transformative to society over the course of the next 2 decades, 3 decades. Web3 was not a megatrend. Web3 was, kind of largely a hype cycle created by some of the VC community. And it didn't even make sense, because I don't even understand like what half the use cases were. It just didn't make any sense, And so as a CEO, you have to make sure that you don't pivot your company based on Web3, because you would have been completely irrelevant. But if you pivot your company on AI, that's actually a completely relevant exercise to do. And knowing the difference is actually pretty important. And the question is, how do you know the difference? You know the difference when it doesn't take a PhD to understand what the end use case is and what the value is. When you talk to someone about Web3, they would be like these very overtly highfalutin, definitions about what's going to happen in a completely distributed world. And, it was just like, I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. With AI, you go to ChatGPT, you ask it a question, you get an answer. I don't need an explanation of what AI does. It's like, it's especially on the generative AI side, it made it so human and understandable that it was like, wow, this is magical. And if you can keep getting this thing to get better and better, eventually you'll solve math problems, and eventually you'll solve, rather than just doing well on tasks, it'll do jobs, and eventually those jobs, they'll do better than humans, and on and on and on and on. And so what I think is important is spotting the mega trends and using them as a tailwind and not fighting them, and spotting the hype cycles and ignoring them, and not trying to run a popularity contest with your employee base where you try to go out and see how many people like you, but instead do right by them and make sure that you've actually created decisive patterns where you actually you might be wrong, but don't be confused, because indecision is a really bad thing. So like having fast decision cycles, having clarity in the framework on how decisions get made in the organization, those are all important dimensions.
How do you think AI will transform business, and how are you leveraging AI at your work or organization? Because I feel like it's supposed to be implemented throughout the organization to a degree.
I mean, there's hundreds of different ways that it'll transform business. But like if I think about it, Cisco, what are we doing? Like there's going to be a bunch of things that we use AI for to make our employees productive. Engineers will write better code because of AI. Product marketers will write better messaging documents because of AI. Our website will look better because of AI. Our strategy team will build better plans because of AI, so on and so forth, right? So that's one dimension, which is employees getting more productive and everyone feeling like they have some kind of an assist in getting stuff done. The second thing is our products, we will actually materially improve because of AI. So if you think about at the base level, our product interfaces will all be, fronted with generative AI prompt interfaces, because that'll actually allow for dealing with the talent shortage. I think those things are really important. Making sure that you can have great experiences for IT administrators as well as end users when they're using our products, and making those easy to use. Those will all happen with AI. But also, you will have AI natively built into the product. So we will be able to do better detections. We will be able to do better traffic management with networking. We will be able to do better kind of remediation and response when there's a breach that's detected. We'll be able to do better collaboration with people. When they go into a room, you'll be able to make sure that you can remove background noise. Those are the kind of things that we can do with AI. So like, there's a bunch of, we've spent billions on these kind of things over the course of the past few years, and it's actually really made our products infinitely better. And then the third area of opportunity in my mind is actually securing AI itself. So how can we provide a security infrastructure for AI, not just use AI for our security stack or for our networking stack or collaboration stack or observability or data, but providing a layer of security around AI so that when people use AI, they don't have their data get lost in an ineffective way, or they don't have unintended consequences happen. How do you protect the models that are being used, especially if you have multiple models? If you build an application with AI, how do you not have to worry about every single nuance and security because we've gotten it taken care of? That's another area that we are very focused on. But I think there's every single day there'll be new use cases that emerge. But think of this as a platform just like the internet was, just like mobile was. And it's going to be a fundamentally new way and in the short term, people won't see that much of a difference. So what happens is initially when it comes out, everyone's like, oh my God, this is going to change the world. Then a year and a half goes by and nothing has really changed that dramatically in the world. So you're like, this was hype. And then over the long term, it actually fundamentally starts to alter the course. And in my mind, when you start thinking about that cycle, what Gartner calls the hype cycle, there's this kind of trough of what they call disillusionment. And, in the short term, most companies and most people will overestimate the impact that a technology can have and be disappointed. And in the long term, they will underestimate grossly and be surprised at how much it actually did. So you have to have a long-term view on this, not a short-term view. In the past year, Grace, your and my life didn't change that much with AI, but in the next 10 years, I guarantee you that it'll change quite dramatically.
How do you think about learning AI as an executive? Are you leveraging a certain type of agency, or do you look at the implementation level, or do you we had executives came on to be like, hey, we want 30% of your current work to be replaced by AI, and just ask every employee to use AI on something, or basically we cut off your budget, force you to. What does it look like for you as an executive to learn more about what exactly you should do with it?
I think in my mind, the people that are successful executives are perpetual students, and in my mind over here, it's actually kind of in some way, there's a lot of irony in the fact when people ask, how do I learn about AI? When actually the thing that you're learning about is the learning tool. So like literally, if you ask ChatGPT or Gemini, teach me about AI. It'll actually write a course for you and give you everything that you need to learn about it. And so when you start thinking about like what the bases are, talking to a lot of people really helps. Talking to customers and finding out what they want to do with it, understanding the technology at a detailed level, so you know what the potential of the technology is super important. And you don't have to be a technologist to understand what it does. Even if you're not a technologist, I think you should actually dig a little bit deeper and understand it, and then start to use it in your real life and see if it in fact changes your life a bit for the better. And like, for example, learning is one of the use cases that has completely transformed for me in the past year. Completely transformed. Like, if I want to learn about any topic, if there's anything someone says that I don't know much about, I'll immediately go and spend 15 minutes on ChatGPT or Gemini or something like that. And before I know it, and I'll actually use both and get different answers from both and compare them, and see what I've learned. And it's a fantastic learning tool. So I don't necessarily believe in hiring consultants and doing like agency work to do that. I actually feel there's so much. That's what the internet was built for, is you've got this amazing availability of knowledge in front of you that you can just absorb. And so now, by the way, what do we tell our employees? One of the big areas that we've encouraged our employees is, rather than just building an AI team, everyone should actually be thinking about how they're going to incorporate AI into their body of work that they're doing. Like, if you're an engineer and if you're not doing anything with AI, chances are you're probably doing something wrong. I don't mean just generative AI, but I think, making sure that you've got automation being factored into your thinking in AI, into the code, in the way that you're doing it. Like, it's extremely important that you think about that. Like, you shouldn't ignore that. And so that's the way that at least I've thought about it.
I wonder, this is a very different subject than what we chatted before, but I wonder, if you're
Yeah.
in your 30s, do you remember what you were doing throughout your career, since you're pretty senior at your career? How do you separate your career into three different brackets? What were some core learnings in each separate tier of your career?
I think I was an executive at a pretty early age, in the sense that I had responsibility for running a company at a pretty early age, since in my 20s. And so, but the big changes were the size and scale of the problems that I was dealing with. So I started out with a very, very small company. When I started, it was like 3 people. And then we scaled that up, but we never scaled it up to be a very, very large company. Sub 50 people the whole time I was there. It was like, for a while it got to like 60 or 70 people, but then we had hired too much. So that was the first phase that taught me a lot about how small companies work and how services businesses work. Then the next phase was going from there to an extremely large company. So I went from 50 people, or sub 50 people. Actually, when I left, it was like 25 people to 60,000 people, and that was interesting, because I found out that humans are still humans. And whether it's a large company or small company, other than the communication framework, everything else not is not that different as people make it out to be.
Mhm.
You know. Then I went to a mid-sized company, which is Box, which was kind of like a startup gone public,
Mhm.
founder-led. And that was quite different from a large company. But once again, eventually, I think people are people. Like, we have very common motivations, we have very common things. But what it did have was just a complete disregard for hierarchy in that company, in Box. And so anyone could debate anyone, and that was a really good thing. And then Cisco was the largest of all of the companies, but all the lessons I'd learned in all those companies, I was able to apply at Cisco. And the one thing that I think we've probably done best at Cisco is we have operated at speed and at scale. And that's very hard to do. It's either or. Usually you either go fast or you go big. You never go fast and big. And we've gone fast and big, and actually been quite successful doing that. And that wouldn't have happened had I not had the instinct on how to move fast and the instinct on how to move big from EMC and Box and Doculabs. Like, those were the things that actually prepared me for the job over here. And so every job prepares you for the next job pretty well.
I
Did I
guess
answer your question?
totally. How are you guiding yourself throughout this journey? What were some maybe motivation shift, or some kind of like core lessons, or something that motivates you to becoming bigger and better?
One of my biggest motivations, and I'm not sure if it's the right one because I don't know if she cares about it as much or not, but one of my biggest motivations to make sure that my daughter is proud of the body of work that I did, you know, when I grow up. When I'm done with work and she should look at this and go, oh, you know what dad did taught me something about values on working hard, and I'm going to actually do that as well. I think that would be a good thing to pass on. And so that's a big motivation, which is like I always take a lot of pride in making sure that I am never going to slack off and I'm never going to be, kind of underprepared for something. Like I'm going to give it my all in the job that I do because it's a matter of that I take and my name being assigned to something. And I think a large motivation for that is my daughter and my family and my friends and making sure that they all feel like they're proud of what I've done. I don't care about what the masses think about me, but I care a lot about what the few people that are closest to me think about me and think about the body of work I'm doing. So like I need them to be proud. What drives me, frankly, is the easiest thing to do. And sometimes I lose myself on this one, and it's important not to. And Aaron will actually correct me on this one a lot. Jyoti will correct me on this one a lot, which is just enjoy the job. Don't try to get too far ahead of that, because if you just enjoy the job every day and get a little bit better every day, the power of compounding takes over. And so like what keeps me going is just learning a little bit every day, getting a little bit better every day, enjoying the job every day, working with people you like every day, pushing each other, having the debates that are spirited, expanding your perspective, not being too tied to your own opinion. Like I think about myself as I'm a guy that has strong opinions that are loosely held, that are easily changeable when you give me new data. Like I will flip flop in a nanosecond if you give me better argument. But it's important that you hold your opinion strongly and can debate them out.
On that note, we have a 1 minute fire round for you. Number one question: what's your favorite book?
What's my favorite book? Ooh, so many, but I would say the one that's taught me the most about business is Clayton Christensen's Innovators Solutions. That's probably the book that's taught me the most about business. It's like, every other book has been fantastic, but that book is like, for me, the most important book that I've ever read. And it still holds the test of time. Like it still works even today. It's kind of wild. There's a lot of insight in that book.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
My mother. She just passed away a year ago. She's probably made the biggest impact in my life in general. My career, a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, but my mother was probably the most impactful in my life. I think my family is pretty amazing. And then my friends and some of my extended family are just angels in my life. So I'm very blessed with people around me.
That's really sweet. And who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who do I, dead or alive?
It's your party.
Oh, it's my party, and if I wanted to have, I would probably have two parties. One with the people that are alive, is all my close family and friends, and colleagues that I work with very closely. And then if there was people who are passed away, I would say probably my mother and grandmother together. That would be. I don't think when my grandmother died, I was 19. I don't think I fully soaked in the dynamic of the three of us together as much as I would have liked to. That would have been fun. Very thoughtful questions, Grace.
We have one last one. Thank you. Where can we find you outside of work?
Where can you find me outside of work? I mean, I'm assuming on social media, you mean?
Whatever you want.
I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. I like hiking. I'm in the Bay Area. I tend to go hiking a lot. But yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably my go-to social platform.
Love it. Okay. Thank you so much, Jeetu, for coming on the show. This is such a great conversation.
Thank you, Grace, and appreciate you having me, and congratulations on all that you're doing.
Let me quickly end stream. Thanks for tuning into Smart Venture Podcast. If you learned something from the episode or even just mildly tolerated me, please subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. I promise I will keep bringing you more successful, insightful interviews and insider tips about startups. Remember, sharing is caring. So tell your friends to listen too, or enemies, I won't judge. Until next time, keep venturing smartly.